You can't talk about organizing spaces without taking into account the greatest of all organizers, the Greeks. The Greeks were the epitome of all disciplines, from science to philosophy. The Greeks in their prime had an absolute monopoly over the world. But this success and creativeness of the Greeks didn't just stop at their fields of study. Even their living spaces were organized and had a space for everything and anything a person living back then needed. And some of these tips are so timeless that they are still applicable today. What are some of these amazing tips the Greeks left behind for us to inherit? And are these tips applicable to our modern homes and living spaces? Let's find out together. But before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more similar content. The Greeks, at the height of their reign, were known for being quite extravagant and had living quarters that were more accustomed to pleasure than utility. But over time, the concept of the home serving the purpose of pleasure became the utility aspect. When we come to the classical era of the Greek Empire, houses were often centered around a courtyard, and these houses were called oikos, which translates to courtyard houses, of course. These houses' main attraction was the courtyard, where functions were held, and members of the house relaxed and engaged in leisure activities. Most homes had a wide center passage almost as long as the house itself, which increased the airflow in the house and made sure that the houses were naturally lit up during the day, making the maximum use of environmental light sources. Most of these houses were single-storied, but some had an upper level as well. Houses in the cities often had the frontmost portion of the house serving as a storefront or providing any other service, while access to the house was only possible via the inner courtyard. The rooms of the house were seen as attached to the courtyard, and they were often intended for specific purposes. But apart from the kitchen and a granary, if in use, every other room's use was interchangeable, allowing for a flexible living plan for members of the house. But rooms were not always partitioned in such a manner in Greece. Before the Classical Age, the Greek Iron Age, houses had a much more cold, mechanical feel to them and were built in a style called megaron, and it emphasized a more linear style of architecture in which the rooms were segmented with no specific intended purposes and had one large room that served as the universal living space for all the members of the household. It is important to understand the way in which the Greek household took form over the years of the empire's existence. As the Greeks progressed from a more war-waging nation to one that promoted peace and learning, housing styles shifted from necessity toward leisure. Greeks began to see their homes as a space to not just rest their heads, but to explore their interests in privacy and manage their interests away from the public's eye. Our current understanding of ancient Greek housing and how they organized their spaces is limited, as many structures were made of much more brittle material like wood or bricks that often deteriorated long before we could uncover them. So our inferences are often made on the basis of what the Greeks often left inside these rooms that remain preserved after all these years. While physical evidence makes a rather strong case for the Greeks' flair for architecture, what really backs their architectural prowess and intellect are the written records that still exist as to the process of construction. One of the best manuscripts that describe Greek living quarters are Roman architect Vitruvius's observations in his De Architectura. These scripts show us how there were two primary methods to house building in ancient Greece. One was rubble masonry and the other ashlar masonry. Rubble masonry was often the more cost-effective method, as it involved the process of constructing rooms using small stones that were stacked on top of each other and reinforced, while ashlar masonry built rooms using slabs of rock that were cut out from huge pieces of limestone. This created an obvious distinction where the upper class more often used ashlar masonry to build their houses, while people in a lower class used rubble masonry. Coming back to the room structure of classical Greek houses, it is important to understand that archaeologists and historians were only able to make inferences on the basis of the items that were left behind in the rooms that they discovered, and on recognizing items like stoves, braziers, and loom accessories. It was understood that Greeks did not designate a space for everything. Even stoves and ovens were mobile, and could be shifted in between rooms to suit the user's needs and to match seasonal weather changes. Although the rooms of a house were not designated to any one cause, items were stored in a very organized and meaningful manner. Cutlery items like plates, spoons, and bowls were believed to be stored in cupboards, just like how we do nowadays. But the discovery of these items in several rooms has led historians to believe that these items were probably kept in portable storage or had extensions that allowed the cutlery to be carried into other rooms, allowing those who performed chores to do so at their convenience. One very important thing to understand is that the Greeks did not segregate their spaces for the two genders and made sure every room had dynamic utility, which means that every room could be used by anyone. The only proof for any sort of gendered rooms and storage in ancient Greek housing comes from literary sources where women had a designated part of the house as their living quarters called gynaeconitis. But once again, the discovery of tools that were used by the women of the time, such as weaving tools and cooking appliances, were not just found in rooms designated as the living area or kitchen, but also in the communal courtyard, suggesting that the activities of women were not limited to their gynaeconitis and could be practiced in any part of the house as to their convenience. The important takeaway from the average Greek household should be the lack of designated spaces and their flexibility, which is often highlighted by appliances that could be shifted around the house and used anywhere. In today's modern lifestyle, we have gotten used to compartmentalizing things and making sure that they work within such a designated space, or not at all. This in turn also creates gendered spaces, forcing both genders to work within their own spaces alone and decreasing sensitivity towards each other's problems. A return to such gender-neutral living spaces, highlighted by a central communal space, would make it easier for everyone in a household and reduce the pressure to perform any one function within any one room. Now, by today's standards, the space to organize things is determined by the size of your wallet. More money means more space to organize things, but the bigger a house gets, it often feels more like empty space than a place to be lived in. This is where the Greeks once again shine. If we traced our steps in Athens, we would find that, on average, every single house was the same size. The average Athenian agora did not differ in size between a rich man and a poorer man. While big, luxuriant villas certainly existed, these were more often reserved for nobles, politicians, or any other person of high social standing. Due to the similarity in spacing for Greeks, they often tried to distinguish themselves with interior decoration, which gave rise to beautiful Greek interior design. This was visualized using elaborate mosaics and engravings that showed their status. We can see that in general, Greek living spaces are dynamic and non-specified and achieve maximum utility by not conforming to any sort of bias or standard. Every room could be used for every purpose, and the house was seen more as a shared living space to explore one's pursuits and desires instead of just being a place to rest one's head. The idea is to have a space that serves its purpose while not limiting itself, a dynamic space allowing for a more flexible shared living space experience. So are there any aspects of their architecture that you would adopt into your own home? If so, which of these timeless tips would you adopt? Let us know down in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like this video and hit the subscribe button for more timeless tips for modern living.